This is the 4th year that we've run the New News, and I find it interesting to reflect back on the sorts of things we discussed just 4 years ago. We were seriously debating whether Twitter was useful for journalists or not. Clearly it is. I remember a discussion about whether the iPad would solve the business model problem for newspapers. Well, clearly not. And Facebook, of course, still felt quite new, whereas I think some would argue that it's now old hat. And so the idea behind this session is to encourage these extremely brave people to my left to think big and tell me what the New News will be talking about in 4 years' time and in 5 years' time. And we've got a panel that is uniquely well qualified to do this, apart from courage, because of course they are being recorded and we may look back. The man immediately to my left is Ben Barren. He just told me that he was doing a PhD, I think, on the information superhighway.
A master's.
A master's on the information superhighway in the early 90s, when I thought the information superhighway was a potholed track, but anyway. He's the founder of socialdesk.com.au, which develops new types of performance social advertising, and he's an expert in tracking brands in social media. He's too modest to own that anyway. Isabelle Oderberg, on his left, started her career in journalism with a degree in Melbourne. She's done a whole variety of jobs in journalism, but her last job, before her current one, was the first social media editor at News Corporation, and she developed a social media strategy across all Australian newsrooms. She now works for the Red Cross, pushing that organisation into the new world of information and communications. To her left, we have Zac Zavos, who's co-founder and managing director of Conversant Media, an online company that produces the Australian culture website Lost at E Minor, the sports opinion website The Raw, and the mainstream tech website Techly. And finally, on the far left, we have Emily Wilson, who is the editor-in-chief of Guardian Australia. She joined The Guardian 14 years ago and has worked in a whole variety of places, but she is now, of course, part of the Guardian's attempt to make the leap from being a print newspaper produced in Manchester to being a global English language web-based news brand, one of the few perhaps. So what we're going to do, each of them have been asked to speak for about 3 minutes and make their bravest predictions. They were busy arguing with each other back there in the green room. I'm hoping they're going to do some of that in front of you as well, because it was quite lively and entertaining. And we will leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So Ben, your predictions, please.
Well, like any good sort of person who doesn't want to make too much of a prediction first, it was interesting when we were talking about sort of 93, 94 and a university using a LexisNexis database, which was an amazing database and still is. I started then at 95 in an ad agency that was doing stuff like CD-ROM advertising, and then there were these banner advertising, and companies like Yahoo came into the Australian market. I think when I worked at 9MSM, which had this thing called Sidewalk, they were trying to copy Fairfax's City Search. And then there was the Microsoft 9MSN partnership, and that sort of expanded, and you had Fairfax Online. I worked on a lot of bringing like Motor Magazine, Wheels Magazine online, Car Point launch. You had Drive and Car Sales, which become a huge company, realestate.com, obviously now still a huge company. Then in the late 90s, I mean, this time you had search engines like Lycos, Excite, Alta Vista, and then you had Overture, which became, I think, Go.com or went into Yahoo. Then Google came out. Everyone thought search was dead, but Google proved search wasn't dead. Then we had the huge valuations, the stock market, dot-com boom. Then you had crash. Then I went and worked at a comfortable company like Telstra or Census. They then sort of realised that search wasn't dead, local search. They had all this Yellow Pages business. And then early 2000s, I got fascinated by these blogs and podcasting and RSS, and I'm like, I'll be an entrepreneur, I don't need a safe job. And yeah, the grass is always greener, as I say. Entrepreneurs want to be venture capitalists, people employed want to be entrepreneurs, venture capitalists want to work in hedge funds, and hedge fund guys want to do something that makes them feel real again. So yeah, after that sort of period, then you've got Facebook. They turned down $1 billion from Yahoo, I think. And everyone thought, my God, you knocked back $1 billion, and now I think Facebook's a $150 billion company. And yeah, Google bought YouTube. They thought Google buying YouTube for $1.1 billion was overpriced. They probably bought the future of television. And yeah, then you've got this latest phase, which is sort of moving into the mobile phase. Facebook's huge, Google's sort of trying to keep up, Amazon's a major business, and then you've got new social networks like Instagram is mammoth, WhatsApp being bought for $2.5 billion, controlling the SMS market, and new things like Ello, Oculus Rift.
Now, tell us what Ello is, because not everybody will know.
Well, I'm not an expert in Ello, but Ello to me really reminds me most of Friendster or early MySpace, which I think of social networks like nightclubs or restaurants. I mean, someone opens a new restaurant or nightclub, Ello's a new one. It doesn't really work properly. Posts don't work, but I guess it's private, it's anonymous. Supposedly, although people use their names on there, it's got a nice font. So I think I like its font. But yeah, so I'm always excited by the new thing. I think at the moment people in the US say that mobile's dead, it's all about wearables. So the Apple Watch, the health tracker in it, Fitbit, how well do I sleep, predicting my heart attack, stuff like that. So that was
the health journalism of the future, predicting your reader's heart attack.
Yeah. So that's the sort of stuff I'm interested in.
Get an audience. Isabelle, your take on the question.
I've got a few different things that I've thought about in the last week of trying to get some ideas together to come along with today. Fundamentally, the model of journalism at the moment in Australia is quite broken, and it's the financial model, I mean, and the way that news organisations in Australia make their money is a problem. We've seen that journalists are being made redundant across the industry. We've seen that budgets aren't there. And I think that will impact on the way that technology is rolled out in newsrooms. I don't know that necessarily the resourcing is there to always be at the forefront of what's going on in the technology world. Some of that might not be a bad thing. Some of the technology that we've seen rolled out, and I know, Emily, you took exception to me using the word technology. I call it technology. I don't know. I'm thinking of data visualizations. I'm thinking about interactives, that kind of thing. I think some of that has actually been unconstructive. I think that it's put layers between the information and the reader, which aren't necessarily a good thing. The idea of, for instance, a data visualization is that you actually take people closer to the actual story, and instead we've got these amazing, highly technical interactives online that you have to go through 10 steps to actually figure out what it's trying to say. I don't think that's been a good thing, and I don't think they do particularly well online. I certainly didn't see them doing particularly well online. So that's kind of one aspect. I do think that we've been saying for a long time in the industry that coding for journalists was going to be a really big deal. I continue to believe that a journalist that can code is worth their weight in gold. I think being able to create a crawling program that can go over a government website and grab data out of it and spit it out is just an incredibly powerful thing to find stories, because there's just a wealth of information online to be had if you know how to trawl it, digitally speaking. I also think that the area of algorithms is going to be increasingly important. We know a little bit about, for instance, Facebook using an algorithm to surface its content to users, and we know that BuzzFeed, for instance, uses an algorithm. I think that algorithms, in order to surface quality content that journalists can leverage into stories, will be increasingly important. And I don't think enough work has been done by news organisations in that area. I also think that my career trajectory in the sense of leaving a traditional news organisation and going into the not-for-profit sector is something that we're seeing among a lot of journalists who believe that private organisations who have direct access to information can now actually be creating their own content and taking that directly to an audience using platforms like social media. And I think that's going to continue. I think that traditional media will have much more competition from companies creating quality content themselves. ANZ is another one that's just set up an internal newsroom in Australia and are doing that. And the other thing I wanted to sort of raise as a possibility, which I don't know if I agree with the proposition that I'm actually myself raising, which is an interesting dichotomy to kick off with, but I wonder whether the surveillance technology evolution and what we're seeing in that area could potentially be a good thing for journalists. I mean, I'm thinking about things like drones. There's a lot of conversation around drones being used for surveillance purposes, but what if journalists were able to use that to go over a war zone, to get quality footage and not put their people at risk? What if the technology that's sourcing user information in Australia, like what's being suggested in current legislation, what if that information started being leaked to journalists? It's not good for the public. From a journalism point of view, you know, could they be getting access to better information? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's an incredibly dangerous and subversive thing to ask, but I'd like to ask it anyway.
Well, we might come back to some of those questions. Drone journalism. Interesting. Zac, would you like to give me your ideas and predictions?
Yeah, I mean, and actually to the point about drones is I think there's always been a flight to richness in media, and you know, perhaps you could have a drone which then you view the footage of say a war scene through an Oculus Rift, and you know, Facebook have bought that 3D virtual reality company for a couple of billion. How will that play out in terms of where media is going? I think generally there is this gravity towards richness, and that, you know, anything that is making the experience more immersive will be really powerful. I think, you know, and again, Ello is interesting. There's two broad trends, I think. One is this always connected element. We've all got mobile phones, and mobile phones are getting a sense of identity. So Facebook will soon be able to roll your identity not just through your handset and your browser, but also through TVs and other environments. So, and that opens up enormous possibilities. You know, information being tailored for you, for people, being able to, you know, tailor your homepage of news, but also awareness of where you are. We're seeing apps which will say, you know, you're about to go to work, I think, and that's, you know, avoid this road. So this awareness of where you are, what you're looking to do, I think is very, very powerful. The new Tesla car, for instance, will actually drive up to you when it knows or thinks that you're going to leave your house. So the possibilities about this endless, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But the possibilities about this endless awareness of location and intent will open up huge possibilities for journalism. The other side of that is privacy, and you know, the two kind of fly against each other in many regards. And what we're seeing with NSA and the Snowden leaks is kind of concerning. So we're seeing, against all these possibilities opening up, people wanting to get control of their data. And in our business, where we sell web advertising, data is so critical to tailoring the experience. And so people quite rightly are saying, well, hang on, I want to control this, and I think there's some value in it. And yeah, this is networks like Ello and others coming through. Where will it go? I think, you know, there's very strong patterns of people sacrificing fidelity and privacy for convenience. And so probably, I think this constant always-on tailoring will be really powerful in our life, but also in journalism.
Well, there's things I want to come back to there as well in terms of content. Emily, lucky last.
Not to say that you're not doing amazing stuff for the Red Cross, but I think that everyone sort of gets digital now, even the most sort of Luddite-like newsroom where they're still talking about the resurgence in print. Even they have digitally led newsrooms, they have audience teams, they think about new platforms, they have big dig dev teams. So everyone's in the game now. You've got the private sector also going into the news game. You've got this huge avalanche of, you know, kind of okay stuff out there on the web. And so my prediction, however...
Namely?
Huh?
Namely?
What do you mean?
BuzzFeed, or is that what you mean by okay?
Oh, no, I meant, you know, if you've got a bank producing loads of content, absolutely from a standing bias start, I mean, or whatever, compromise start. However, ANZ, I'm sure it's a great bank and they've got great people there, but it's, you know, news produced by a bank in a world where there's lots of issues around banking. Anyway, so I think that all of that legislates for the growing importance of the brand that you can really trust. If you're just a sea of news stories everywhere, then knowing that this version is done by a bunch of people who are independent and serious and trying to shine a light on all that is going to become increasingly important.
No, can I just respond to that?
Yeah.
Because I think obviously there are organisations that would be perceived as having bias, but I think that that I would make two points in response. I guess would be, the first one is that a lot of the Australian media brands are doing themselves damage or have done themselves significant damage. So I think there is a reasonable amount of apathy towards them anyway. That would be the first point. But the second point I would say is that a lot of what they're putting out from the banks is regurgitated anyway. So why not take... I mean, I don't work for a bank, so this is completely hypothetical. But why wouldn't that bank say, well, at least we can attempt to disseminate the information that we want to disseminate, whether that's about interest rates or whatever else, our commentary, because they do a lot of sort of commentary that the market's interested in knowing, and put it directly to their readership.
I'm just going to ask Zac and then Ben to comment on that. Zac, do you want to have a go at that?
Well, the way that the banks get their information, get audience to their articles, is through what The Guardian and other sites are offering, which they're giving away those links at the bottom of every news article you read. It'll say you might also like. I'm sure everyone's seen those, and that's a service called Outbrain, or another one called Taboola. And there's always one external link, and this is really prime real estate, and yet all the media organisations pretty much in the world, you guys run Outbrain, are giving that away. What's been surfaced up? Banks, private content. So is this not sort of a challenge?
Well, Ben, do you want to have a go at this, because you're in the advertising business?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked for banks, and I don't know if the banks would do content, quote unquote, that well. But then I'd also say possibly, I don't know if professional media can always do content that good. I mean, I find in Australia the best, and maybe globally, the best content comes from someone firsthand, the actual person experiencing the event or taking the picture. The next one often comes from the nothing to lose, independent person who is like 22 hours round the clock, not the 9 to 5 safe worker. But there's another level that I find very interesting. In Australia, what do they say, the Latika Burks, or what are the ABC people in Canberra? Their personal Twitter accounts.
She works for Fairfax now.
Well, there you go, Fairfax. But it's their personal accounts, not their employers' accounts, you know. And so this whole sort of hashtag following, I mean, there's a list I follow on Twitter and have for years, Australian journalist. It's a Twitter list of about 500 people. And that stream I always have running on one of my monitors as a column, and I'm like, it's just brilliant in aggregate. So that list of 500 journalists in Australia, personal accounts, professional accounts, beats any organisation's list. So there's something about the disaggregation, the aggregation of first-hand, professional, it's sort of all the noise and narrative can sort of come together if you've got the tools, back to the algorithms.
Can I try and push this in a slightly different direction and just sort of paint a scene, which I think is perhaps only 6 to 12 months in the future? We already have almost every citizen walking around with a mobile device that can take video and photos and can publish to the web within seconds of deciding to do so. We have Google Glass, which I don't think is any sense ubiquitous yet, but
it's last year.
But you get the idea of the technology, that you're actually wearing something which is constantly recording where you are and who you're talking to and what you're seeing. And you've mentioned that very soon now we'll probably all be wearing, or many of us will be wearing, devices that actually say how we are, how we slept, what we ate, how our heart's going. If we conceive all of ourselves as potential content providers to media, what's that going to do to journalism? Do you want to have a go at that, Zac?
Well, our sports site, The Raw, publishes around 1,000 fan articles a month, and we edit those, and so it's very important to us. But I think to Emily's point, there will always be a need for strong media organisations such as The Guardian. I'm really interested in one, how they harness this information. I think that's going to be powerful. But I mean, how does The Guardian respond to organisations like BuzzFeed, like Vice, like Vox Media, which are getting hugely fueled with funding? I mean, Vox has raised 50 million plus, and are these organisations really championing journalism, or is it sort of convenience kind of journalism? I don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And when they've got so much funding coming in, they don't have to make the money in the same way as more traditional media organisations.
Emily, do you want to go at that?
Well, I mean, we don't have the same funding model as most organisations anyway, because we have a trust, a charitable trust, and a nest egg and all that. But BuzzFeed's success runs parallel to our success, so we don't feel like they're taking anything away from us. And at times we've gone, listicles, and we've done lots of listicles, and then now all readers are sick of listicles, so we've stopped doing listicles. But we watch what they do with great interest. They're moving to sort of long form and serious journalism, and when they put a woman's editor into Kenya, we thought that was really bold and interesting. So we think BuzzFeed are super cool. I've forgotten what the question... Oh, and Vice... It's amazing what they've done. It's been inspiring. It's really inspiring, the stuff they've done in the Ukraine and places like that. So,
and now partly owned by News Corp.
Yes.
Partly, yeah.
Fine.
Martin Sorrell.
Sorry?
Well. And Martin Sorrell.
Yeah. So I just see those as really, they're centres of kind of new kinds of excellence, innovation. They're confident, full of hope, optimistic. They're both great.
Would you use a drone? Would you give a foreign correspondent a drone?
And now we have to have drone operators in the newsroom, and where will they sit? And I think it's really, really interesting notion for war zones. Really interesting.
Embedded drones.
Embedded drones, yes.
Embedded drones, and then getting shot down, and it's really interesting, especially in places like Syria.
Yes.
A bit sci-fi right now, maybe, but really interesting.
Especially because journalists aren't safe anymore. They used to have a certain amount of, protection. They don't have that protection anymore. But can I go back to what you were saying about user-generated content, because that's something I'm really, really interested in. And I think that user-generated content has become central to every newsroom operation. I think creating a content army out of your readers and asking them to be part of the newsroom process. Verification of that content, as we've seen this week, or was it last week, at Fairfax, can be a problem. And I think that people are going to have to really skill around that. I also think The Guardian has an engine where people can submit a user-generated content acceptance engine. If that, I don't know how to, and it's phenomenal and it's really great. And I think that a lot of news organisations are going to have to look at that engine and try and put similar things in their own operations. But I also think that there's a really interesting phenomenon around citizen journalism. And I know we talk about it, but to watch what guys like Brown Moses are doing from their living room, if the technology continues to evolve in a way, like facial recognition, for instance, if someone at home was allowed to use facial recognition on YouTube or something like that to continue to do that kind of journalism, is everyone familiar with Brown Moses? I don't know. No. Okay. So Brown Moses is a blogger who was based out of Birmingham, who sat on his couch. He was really he wasn't a journalist. He was completely just a guy sitting in his living room, and he started becoming interested in YouTube videos of the conflict in Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East. And he started to use the serial numbers on bombs in the footage to track down where those bombs were actually coming from, and was able to kind of say with a degree of certainty that they were Russian or they were whatever made, and put a whole new kind of emphasis and drew a whole lot of light to the fact that this weaponry was coming from Russia or from other places. And he did all this with an iPad on his couch. And just the absolute epitome of what someone with a brain and an internet connection can do. Phenomenal work. And he's actually now crowdfunding for his own journalistic enterprise, which is called Bellingcat, which is really interesting. But I think that as the technology and the publicly available technology increases, we're going to see much more of that. And I think it's a great thing for journalism. And I think that those people will start to do joint ventures with The Guardian or with other news organisations, and I think it's a really good thing for the flow of information.
Ben, what potential can you see for journalism in everybody being wired, everybody emitting data all the time?
Well, I do a lot of professional work, sort of quote unquote, for brands trying to find influencers. I recently worked on something where Jamie Oliver has a new dinnerware set. So I have to go and find sort of the perfect dinner party for Jamie Oliver to cook for.
My place.
So I start running. A lot of algorithms on keywords. This is basic Boolean search. If you've got access to the fire hose of data, because one of the things that people don't talk about now, if you're in Australia and you're trying to get every tweet from Australia, Facebook cut off their data. It's very hard now, and you've got to pay a lot of money. You've got to pay at least $800 a month to get access, basically, to historical Australian social media. So, I'm looking for people with home blogs, mums that are at home, and all these different criteria, so I can then sort of present 25 relevant people. But the point is, there's a whole lot of mums at homes, and some dads now. A new guy wrote a blog, reservoirdad.com, and he's sort of like doing some cool stuff. But some of the mum bloggers are just constantly amaze me, some of the reach that they have across Facebook, Instagram especially. So I think there's still this great notion that anyone can sort of start a business from home. And I think these different verticals are still going to be explored more. And they're traditional journalism verticals. There's going to be mums, parenting, kids, sport, finance, travel. And these are like what a newspaper is or what magazines are. On YouTube, the cosmetics section is just amazing. The amount of 16-year-old girls doing makeup tips, not the ones that I use, but are huge. And so some of the big brands now are starting to partner with these YouTube leaders rather than re-engage your sort of A-type model celebrities. I mean, they're literally choosing the person with 1 million fans on YouTube than the person with the modelling contract, which I think is really interesting.
It's sort of explosion of media, though, rather than saying I don't think it's going to be taking over traditional media or other types of media. I think it's just media's everywhere,
but
isn't it?
It's for me, the UGC, where we're at right now, we've got a thing called Witness. It's just really easy for people to send stuff now. And so we've only got about 30 journalists here, and we're trying to cover national, it's a lot. And this week we're like, mental health week, it's been really great, but we haven't done anything, what can we do? And then we're like, we'll just ask our readers to talk about what it's meant to them, what, if anything's been interesting or missed. So we just get someone to put up a little thing kind of opening it out, and then you get this just explosion of interesting voices from all kinds of backgrounds, and it becomes a piece of work, the like of which a bunch of journalists could never produce. Or another little example this week is where it's not about specialist knowledge, it's just about everyone in the whole of Australia having a phone with the blood moon, and it's just like, what should we do about that? And we'll just everyone can just send their pictures and we'll just pick the best, and that's it. And it's so rich, it's so rewarding. And
if I can use the Mental Health Week as a jumping off point, perhaps for an example that might be out there. Let's suppose in 5 years, Emily, you commission me to write a feature article about what the experience of having a mental illness is actually like. And of course, if you did that now, I would go out and I'd talk to some people and I'd sit at my computer and tap out a story with some beautiful quotes. I'm a really good writer, you should commission me. But in 5 years' time, why wouldn't I construct a game? An immersive experience in which somebody could actually have a little flavour, all based on rigorous journalistic research of what it's actually like to have a mental illness.
And there are those games that Mary Hamilton, our head of audience, who you know, she plays games where the whole point of it is to have a really shit time but learn. And so there's things, aren't there, where you're in Somalia and your family have been stolen from you, and you have to work out how am I going to eat and pay off the local warlord. Or so I'm probably misquoting her entirely. And there's some people who will play games that are designed to make you feel really bad, and that sounds like one of them. And I'm sure, but to have, if you went out and with your big brain and spoke to lots and lots of people, you would pick up themes and resonances and provide nuance and filtration and ambiguity, and then we could throw it open to the audience. So I still think there was a value, but I think there'll still be value in.
And so would you, for example, sorry, Isabelle, I'll come to you, would you say, rather than reporting on the difficulties of the budget decisions, say, okay, there's your settings, you've got a deficit, here's your potential expenses, you do it.
We did do that actually
did
this
that?
time, yeah.
Tell
We
us
were like,
about
so
that.
how would you balance it?
Yeah.
Well, all our readers were really fair, and they gave all the money to poor people and trashed Australia's defence forces, and they didn't want us to pay loads of money for the Japanese to build us submarines, and they thought that the ABC should be protected, and that's what we learned. So, but anyway, it was great. People love interaction when it's very much about them or great fun.
Isabelle, you wanted to...
I guess I just wanted to make the point that I think that there seems to be, and I'm not saying this is you, I'm just saying there seems to be a view that in this sort of new world that long form journalism isn't enough. And I think that
is not
enough. Like that it doesn't work online or whatever. And I just wanted to go on record as saying it's just crap. If a piece of long form journalism is well written and well researched, it will work on mobile platforms. It will work on an iPad if it's good, and I've seen that from being at news organisations where when the pieces are good, people will still read them. But I think that what you can do is you can build stuff around it to complement it, where you want to take a long form, like a writing approach, where you might write a piece about what it's like to struggle with mental illness, but then you might have a little bit of micro video interviewing the people that you've spoken to so that people can put a face to that name or a face to that story, or you might have a game as complementary to the piece. The thing I worry about with some of the game stuff, don't tell Mary I said this, is it makes me a little bit nervous because, like I said, I do feel that there are certain technologies in journalism that actually keep the reader further away from the centre of the story and put layers in between getting there and where they are and how to get to the end point, whether that's education or informing or whatever point you want to make with your story, or the objective you want to achieve. And I worry about that, and I worry that sometimes the technology actually can get in the way of telling the story.
Of course,
I was just going to say, to me, I think about it as granularity. I think there once was a time when a form of journalism was you knew what it was. It was an article in a newspaper or something like that, and now you've got all these news sites, and each journalism could be a game or it could be a tweet, and it's certainly no longer the case that the main form of journalism is an article. That's an article is one kind of output of a piece of journalistic work, and usually is towards the end. It's often the earlier stuff, the live coverage, the tweets. But you're also seeing sites which again, the old media back in the day were either sort of quite serious and well-formed and very consistent in the granularity of coverage, or very light. And now you're actually mixing them. And so BuzzFeed, on the one hand, have got a Pulitzer Prize journalist. On the other hand, they're doing listicles still and those quizzes. And so I think, the question is, how does that play out, or that different form of journalism? I think that's kind of going to be interesting.
I was going to say it's definitely there's definitely a race to the bottom going on in terms of the journalists that have gone, the resource that is gone, and the front page of news.com.au or the Daily Telegraph or the Herald Sun. Because it's impressions, shares driven. So you're getting shemale cooked by male prostitute husband, and all the variations of stories. One of the things that the BuzzFeed guy said that was interesting on a talk he did is they don't believe in the homepage. They don't believe on the front page because, again, back to the black box, it's an algorithm of looking at where the traffic goes, where the referral traffic goes, and there is a new dynamic, this algorithm that was mentioned of, do you sort of let that algorithm stuff drive what you're creating story-wise? But then people like Vice, Politico overseas, sort of cherry-picking some of this sort of investigative journalism as well, which is fascinating, and I think the finance markets are interesting, and sport, obviously, as well.
But there are different...
Sorry. I was only going to slightly disagree with you about, you can do complementary stuff online. The great thing for me, and it'll happen more and more as we get more confidence, is if you don't have a paper, if you don't have that heavy platform with very specific needs, you can just go, like in the Scottish referendum, our UK team did loads of stuff. We were like, what should we do in Australia? And in the end, we just made a little film. And we just like, we've done it. That's us. We've told the story in our own way. It's just a film. We don't need any other words. We don't need any other objects. But it could have been a quiz. It could have been a game. You can just decide, that's how we'll tell this story. And bang, that's it. Finished.
Can I just
and
offer
that's
you a
such
little...
a privilege.
I wasn't suggesting that long form was the only way. I was just saying I don't accept that long form is over because we live in a digital world. And there seems to be some people who think that, and it's just simply not the case. Because if a piece is well written and it's the right, if it lends itself to long form, you see it. If you work in a newsroom, you see it every day. It will go crazy.
Isabelle, I'm just
going
to cut across you there for a moment to float something which, is my opinion and which may be controversial. I don't think we've got multimedia right yet, not by a long shot, have we? It seems to me that when you publish long-form journalism or any journalism with video, they fight each other. They actually don't always complement each other.
When you say we, do you mean news organisations or worldwide or in Australia? Because there's a difference.
Journalists.
Probably traditional news organisations have a habit of they'll put up an article with words, and then the film will be, I guess that's what I was trying to say to you, and the film will be complementary, and then there's all this extra stuff, and readers aren't researchers. Why not just give them one thing that's really great? And so, we haven't got it right. And the other thing is, on traditional news websites, people don't watch a lot of video. That's not where they go for video. They go to YouTube, and that's something we're grappling with in the UK, and we're setting up YouTube channels, and we're going to where the readers are and trying to rethink it rather than coming in with the kind of newspaper mindset.
Ben, do you think news organisations...
I just don't know if you're getting at... There's nothing I hate more than the age site when you're scrolling down a story and you've got 45 tabs open and you're like, where is that video story coming from that sort of auto-plays? But there is a balance. Like on tech stuff, I'll be reading reviews about a product. I'll go... Like, I love the Wirecutter.com because it reviews the reviewers. Then I'll go into the product reviews, like the dense ones. Then I'll go onto YouTube and I'll do like the unboxing and the reviews. I've got a whole process of how I go through reviewing a product, and it does a whole lot of pro video reviews, a whole lot of stuff. So
Now, I want to open it up to questions, and time is galloping on. But I'm going to just to close this part, and before we go to questions from the audience, just ask each of you to imagine that you're at the New News in 4 years' time. And as always, we're talking about what the big issues are in journalism. What will we be talking about, Ben?
Ooh,
You go
journalism.
first.
Oh, geez, I'm a bit stuck on that one. I mean, in 4 years, I think, unfortunately, it's going to be an evolution of where it is, but there'll be probably a lot more mobile reporting networks. I mean, I really do think I wouldn't be surprised if there was sort of like a mobile news startup that, like, not only threw away like the print version, but threw away the sort of the tablet version and the website version, and it was very much short form, because the optimal length of a post on Facebook is 81 characters. And so I could imagine a news organisation that was pretty much publishing in under 200 characters and photos and video.
81 or 82 or 80?
It just keeps getting shorter and shorter. It used to be 110 characters, it's now 81 characters, but the pictures get bigger, which sounds like a simple insight, but bigger pictures and less text, better outcome.
Isabelle, what will we be talking about?
I think it'll depend on whether Australian news organisations get the model right. I think it'll depend on whether they start to make money or not. But I think fundamentally newsrooms are going to be streamlined for the foreseeable future, including for the next 4 years. And I think that the kind of technologies that we'll see coming in will be the kinds of technologies that assist newsrooms to be able to do the best job they can do with less staff, with less human beings. I think that, but like I said, I do think it'll depend on how the discussion around financial models go, because right now it's going to be very dependent.
So you're suggesting that we may not be talking about News Corporation and Fairfax and
I think
the
News
Guardian.
Corp, yes. I think Fairfax is not in quite as strong a position. I don't know. I certainly think that the landscape will be different. I think there'll be less print for sure in the Australian, definitely less print in the Australian marketplace. And, you know, I also think that hopefully Australia would have sped up a little bit towards modernisation. I think Australian news organisations are far behind their international peers in terms of adoption of technology, in terms of attitudes. I personally don't particularly enjoy sitting in an executive, in a boardroom listening to men tell me that social media doesn't matter or social media isn't
where would that have happened to you, Isabelle?
I can't imagine, that really the future is in print, which still, that's a conversation that still goes on in Australian newsrooms. The future is print. I mean, look at any of the speeches by CEOs telling us that the print still has a strong, bright future. I'm not telling anyone anything they don't already know.
Oh, we had some people saying this on Thursday night.
Anyway, I think that the evolution will play a big part in what we see going forward.
What do you think we'll be talking about, Zac, in 4 years' time?
David Brankoff from from Vox Media has said that the great media companies of the future are being built right now, and I firmly believe that's the case. I'd say in 4 years' time we'll be looking at what companies have done. You look at Jeff Bezos, who's just bought the Washington Post. What's he going to do? I mean, everyone's waiting, right? We're thinking, what is Bezos going to do for the Washington Post? How will that flow through media? How will Vox and Vice, his huge sums, and BuzzFeed kind of play out and transform media? So I think it's going to be about that. I think algorithms is definitely, a really interesting area. Narrative Science are writing a lot of sports articles on the web that you don't know and you could not tell it's written by a computer. It's actually really well-written stuff. And will that free up a layer on top where proper journalists write proper stuff and they're not... I mean, has anyone ever said that's a great match review? Like no one cares. They just want the data written. So I think it's how this technology is going to wash through and where that kind of leads out is what we'll be talking about. And just finally, I think we'll be possibly debating about how old school want to continue to 3D print their newspaper, and maybe print is still about, but it'll be 3D printed rather than from a print press, and what that kind of means.
And what will that mean? 3D printing for a newspaper? Just.
Well, no. I mean, if you're insistent on getting the Age on a Saturday, you plug your Kindle into your 3D printer and you print the Age off.
Or every newsagent might have a printer for those who really want that bespoke.
There aren't any newsagents left at the moment, or they're all shut.
Why do you need
Emily, let's Emily give her...
Since we're just making stuff up, I think there's going to be no weekday papers in 4 years in this country. No weekday papers.
Okay.
2 years.
Huh?
I'd say
if print's dying slower than everyone thought, and there's the kind of a bedrock that's been reached. So no weekday papers, unless you're going to get some kind of boutique experience, a kind of home printer or whatever. I think that whatever happens with this sort of agonising thing that's happening at Fairfax and News, their papers will be gone. Maybe they will free them up to new energy, but I think new entrants, I'm not just saying that from a selfish viewpoint, but you've got now Daily Mail Australia, Guardian Australia, BuzzFeed Australia, HuffPo Australia are going to come in hard this year. BBC Australia is kind of ramping it up. They're going around hiring. And there's going to be, the New York Times will come in, then Bezos will be like, what about Australia? And there's going to be loads and loads of new. And then there's going to be your mobile website, which I really like the sound of. Maybe might do that, copy that. And there's going to be new players, and I hope it's going to be really exciting and dynamic, and this sort of agonising decade of everyone trying to work out a funding model will be over or nearly over in 4 years. And
can I ask a question? Am I allowed to do that?
A quick one, because I want to go to the audience.
What you talked about, all of the overseas news organisations that are coming here, and obviously that is happening, and Guardian and Daily Mail are evidence of that. But do we, as a population, we're a very small population, is it worth all of them coming here and having Australian newsrooms and fighting for a piece of a very small pie?
Well, I don't think people browse and read all around the shop. I don't really see it as a pie. And then there's loads of people in Australia who you meet, and the only sort of news they're getting is they'll have liked the ABC on Facebook, and they'll have some of that in their feed. And the ABC is an astounding organisation, but they could probably read a few more stories and find a news outlet that they go to occasionally and get huge enrichment from. And I don't really believe in the pie.
I do want to go.
The pie's a revenue mix.
Okay,
Australia's got very high CPM rates. Got very high yield rates. I
They
think
don't
it is
have
a
to
pie.
hire a
I think
couple
it's
of
going to be a
people.
problematic one.
No, it wouldn't
I do
be.
want to go to the audience. I'm sorry, I'm going to cut across you rudely. We may go back to some of these issues and questions. We've got one question at the back there. A lady just put up her hand, and you next, sir.
Hi there. Given that the theme of this talk is about disruptive technology, it strikes me that a lot of new media, especially things like the phenomenon of the rise of Instagram, is essentially all about photos and the visualisation of the news. So I'm just wondering if anyone has any thoughts about the power of the purely visual. What, if anything, has changed for the
Ben,
news?
do you want to-
Yeah, I might jump in there because I'm totally with you on Instagram. It's sort of been my preferred social network, I guess, until Facebook bought it. And the amount of analysis I do where for under 35-year-olds, I'd say Instagram's pretty much the biggest social network by reach and use. The amount of people with 200,000 to 800,000 people that follow them is quite amazing, while on Twitter the same person will have 5 to 10 to 20,000. The major reason for Facebook's success is because of photos. The major success for the iPhone and Apple is because of photos. Instagram the same. I mean, they spent a lot of time just on their filtering process. It annoys me that when you post on Instagram, it doesn't work on Twitter. All these sort of social networks are trying to create silos, and I think that's a big issue. There's a lot of talk overseas about these social networks not sort of staying separate. But these news organisations, the thing that I dislike about them, and having worked on both sides of them in different ways over a long time, is you walk in there and there's no computer scientists, there's no engineers, there's editors, there's salespeople, there's old white guys who have no idea. And where are the engineers? Who are the experts at photos? I don't want to say the first-hand harvesting of use of photos with an approval process. It sounds good, you've got an engine, but I don't know what to say other than, photos are absolutely key, and they're not done that well here.
There's something about Instagram that's really warm, and I do think in the future of the internet, people are going to more and more look for places that are warm and kind, and this whole kind of trolling, nasty horribleness, people are going to find refuge from that. And there's, when you publish a piece that's really warm and tender, you often get a huge reaction to it. And for me, that there's something about the pictures on Instagram that is just really sweet.
I think just the one thing I'd say about that is that as far as Instagram goes, we don't have very good data in Australia around where people actually are on social. There's very, very limited data. The Census Social Media Report is one of the only really comprehensive, proper Australian reports into social media. According to that, of the people that are on social media, only 21 to 24% are on Instagram, according to the last report. And while I am on Instagram, and while the organisation that I work for is now, I've put them on Instagram, and I think it's very valuable, I think you also have to have a realistic view of what amount of the Australian population is actually on the platform, and at the moment it's not terribly high. To get a positioning is good so that you're ready for when it takes off, but Twitter is a bit the same. Twitter doesn't have high penetration rates here. It just doesn't. And if you want to work in a mainstream frame of mind, you've got to keep that in mind in terms of your weighting as to how much energy and effort you're putting in a newsroom context into that platform.
Zach, do you want to comment on pictures?
Look, I agree with you completely. I think it's all about great images, and all the data says if you've got a good image, you'll get more clicks, more people read, and so on. It's it's great.
I guess one of the themes we touched on briefly today was the idea of privacy within the media, and I think it ties in some ways with the citizen becoming the journalist in a sense. I mean, with anyone with an access to a Twitter account or even to Google now can really broadcast anything if it gets retweeted or rebroadcast a certain number of times. I think another common theme that comes up, especially now in the discussions of what a media organisation actually is the idea of privacy and censorship. With particular reference to, for lack of a better expression, the right to be forgotten, what's been happening recently in the EU and more recently in the US. I was wondering your particular views, maybe particularly Emily's, on how organisations like Google and maybe in the future Facebook are really going to be governed by everything else. Right now we're just sort of, I guess, throwing a lot of that power towards them, and I don't think we've quite realised the consequences of giving that right to be essentially erased from the internet? Because, I mean, it is a reality now that, you know, without going to, you know, specific websites, people will just Google it first. If it's not
so
there,
your question is mainly about the right to be forgotten, is it? Or
it's mainly about who is... are we taking that power away from the power to broadcast and the power to broadcast to the public? Is that going to remain with main media outlets, or is that going to be controlled by non-media outlets?
Okay.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's like the question that takes in all questions and all answers, and occupies huge amounts of our time, thought, worry, and is part of the evolution that we're currently going through as a global company. Takes in loads of that stuff. Are our journalists now more powerful than we are? You know, when we have a star journalist, like in the UK, we have a guy called Charlie Brooker. You know, he's massive. He's incredibly powerful. Is he? So where's the brand? Is it because he's a Guardian columnist, or because it's Charlie Brooker? In terms of the right to be forgotten, I've once taken something down because I thought, I got that woman to do that when she was young and I was young, and it's still there on the internet. It was, never mind what it was, but I got someone to dress up as something. It seemed funny at the time, and it just dogged her through her career, this funny thing she'd done for me when I was a features editor somewhere. And I eventually, after agonising, took it off the website, and I'll never do it again. If anyone else thinks I will. But that's something also our readers editor in the UK and here, that's something we grapple with all the time. Stories that people's past that stay there forever, and they go to job interviews, and is it fair? Why, in terms of who will keep the power, Google is so powerful already, and we're all mainstream media organisations now are vassals of Google and of Facebook. And someone at Google or Facebook wants to lean on a button, our traffic will go down, and then which is our revenue will go down, our power in the market will go down.
And
what's that?
Facebook especially.
And Facebook especially, they twiddle dials,
shocking.
and our traffic goes down globally, and we're like, what do we do to deserve it? And they're just playing with our algorithms.
And they're so hard to deal with as a company. They just change. They'll help you develop an app, and then just go, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore.
And not some out on it. So.
And thousands of dollars just down the drain like that because they changed their minds.
But just to the point, I mean, I think there'll be some shooting stars with people and individuals, but the guy who saw the plane crash in the Hudson, but I think it's more about other entities. So I think there's a famous, it might have been Shaquille O'Neal, someone along those lines, who said, I is the media now, in one of his tweets, and it captured it really well. I mean, people are now, particularly celebrities, or brands, Red Cross maybe an example, they're actually becoming, in their own little way, media entities. They're having one-on-one dialogues with persistent audiences through the Twitter or Facebook channels. So to me, that's more what I'll see happening in my head in 4 years' time.
I'd just say one thing too. I think the really interesting part is citizen journalists that sort of get out of the whole sort of two-sided argument, and I think we haven't really spoken much, or that I've heard, about Tor and the dark web. And I mean, Facebook are just launching some encrypted trial products where you can be anonymous. I mean, what if Facebook or Google launched their own Tor service with dynamic, untraceable IP addresses, sped the thing up because they've got the world's best scientists, and it was a place that anything can happen?
Would you trust them?
Well, I don't know. There's more interesting journalism going on in Tor than there is, for me, on the internet, the clean net.
The clean net.
I just had a really, really quick response because everyone's sort of covered it. But I just wanted to say that I think, especially for young journalists, who it's that catch-22 of you don't have experience in a news organisation, so you can't get experience in a news organisation. And I think self-publishing is a really powerful way to bridge that gap. But I think it's interesting because a lot of the journalists who've made their name self-publishing with platforms like Medium and YouTube, and Medium's just one of the best things to happen to journalism in so long. It's the most powerful thing that someone can just publish and put it out there for themselves. It's brilliant.
I love Medium.
It's so good. It's so good, and it's simple. It's not. There's no crap around it. It's just easy, But the interesting thing to me is a lot of the people who do self-publish and get an audience of their own will eventually end up writing for a mainstream organisation.
Who
pay, exactly. So I think ultimately, and there's a level of prestige, I think, as well, you know, being a Guardian columnist.
And a ready-made global audience, all that rubbish. Yeah.
Exactly. So they get their own audience. But one of the things that I said at News Corp before I left was that, you know, we should be looking at columnists who already have their own audience on social media platforms that can seed their own work and potentially bring us a new audience. You know, that was an interesting thing at the time. And so I think that, yes, that people, I really do believe that individuals and organisations that have direct access to information will be able to generate their own audiences and then merge.
Sorry, last thing, I do think there is going to be, I know we've already seen it with Assange and Snowden, but
Assange. No, I'm only kidding.
I think there are going to be more and more whistleblowers on a global scale, and a huge duty amongst journalists to kind of tech up and find really great description services and allow and be in a position to protect those sources. And I think that will be a trend that kind of plays into your question.
That's something we've talked about a lot. Now, we've got time just for one more quick question.
This is a follow-up. It's interesting, we've got former News Corp and current Guardian, and the question which follows up the last question, if either of those two organisations comes out on top in the future, I would suggest, and I'd be interested in your comment, that it would be much better for the world if the Guardian comes out on top, simply for the reason that the whole import of this discussion leads me to thinking the role of journalism has to be to get the general people to understand what's going on in the world, as distinct from News Corp, which is trying to influence the general people as to what they think. So they're using power, you're using, hopefully, the best of understanding the world.
Okay,
what's your comment on that?
I'm going to cut you short there, and I'll...
News Corp isn't monolithic and has loads of great journalists.
Yeah. Isabelle, do you want to comment briefly on that?
I'm choosing my words very carefully.
You're going to work there again?
I think there's room in the world for lots of different kinds of journalism. I think that you're right, that there are some phenomenally talented people in News Corp, and I think that the Herald Sun is very different to the Wall Street Journal, is very different to Dow Jones, is very different to the Courier Mail. I mean, it is very, very varied in what it has to offer. And a lot of people really enjoy reading their content. So whether you multiple, not you personally, enjoy reading News Corp content or not, there are a lot of people that do. But ultimately, it's going to be survival of the fittest. And the Guardian seem to have a much better grasp of what the future holds and the way that things are going to evolve. And I think if News Corp doesn't potentially get on board, they're going to get left behind.
Just brief comments from our other two speakers.
30 journalists. We have 30 in this country. How many do they have? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Okay, I'm just going to ask for brief comments from our other two speakers. Who should come out on top?
Oh, look, I wouldn't really comment. I couldn't imagine there'd be one coming out on top, really. I think there's more of a need for this constant news cycle, which is exhausting, for some actual proper analysis coming through and winning out. And so I'm not sure whether that's one of those two entities or not.
Yeah, it's also winning at what? The online news category in Australia for text writing with some pictures. Current affairs, newsy stuff. I mean, we've got sports, we've got finance, we've got video. I don't think I see news or Guardian winning outside online news category.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's interesting question, isn't it? But I would just make the point that Cobb & Co. didn't run the steam trains. And my own personal prediction will be the models of the future probably won't be any of today's major media companies.
Harsh.
But The Guardian is, of course, making an attempt to transform itself. However, we are over time, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry for those of you who wanted to ask questions and didn't get the chance. I'm sure our speakers will be happy to talk to you informally afterwards. But for the moment, I hope you'll come to our next session, which is about the glossies, what's happening to magazines in the digital age, with Bill Condy of Cosmos magazine, Amy Middleton of Archer magazine, and Helen McCabe, who's editor-in-chief of the Australian Women's Weekly. So I hope you'll hang around for that session, which begins at 2 p.m. But in the meantime, thank you for being here. Would you please thank our panellists?